It is Passover week as we hear that drum beat to Resurrection Sunday. And of course, we celebrate with humility and thankfulness. Welcome to this April 14th edition of Your Voice, Your Future. I'm Armstrong Williams, your moderator. Let me welcome back Karen Alston, founder and CEO of the Spectrum Circle. Robert Hillard Patillo, civil rights attorney. Joe Griffith, senior fellow, American Freedom Foundation. And Virginia Allen, senior news producer at the Daily Signal. Let me start with Robert. You know, President Trump was in the office today with the president of El Salvador. And I know the Supreme Court a few days ago voted 5-4 for the president to facilitate the return of Mr. Garcia, whom the administration admitted was sent over in error. And the president even said at a press conference that he respects and honors the Supreme Court and carried forth. I thought it was a funny scene today, everybody, that the president was sitting in the Oval Office today with the president of El Salvador. It looked like they put their foot down because the president of El Salvador said, "Not coming back here. I'm a sovereign nation." Now, I would assume the fact that our president is funding this operation in El Salvador, if he really, Joe, wanted this president to bring him back, he would. So I can only surmise, Robert, that the president of El Salvador needed to follow the example that if you're legal and if we deem you a gang, it doesn't matter. We have foreign policy prerogatives and we get to decide who stays and who leaves. Now, I may have misinterpreted the thing, but it's clear that Garcia's not coming back, Robert.
This is one of the most grave moments in American constitutional history. The last time that we had a president just blatantly and openly disregard a ruling of the Supreme Court was probably Andrew Jackson prior to the Trail of Tears, when the Supreme Court ordered him not to, and he said, well, they can come and enforce it. What we're seeing right now is a president that has completely abdicated the constitutional separation of powers. The Constitution says that you have three co-equal branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. We've known since Marbury versus Madison that the judicial system, the Supreme Court, does not make suggestions. They do not make light kind of ideas. This is something that we have to follow. And when you have the president of the United States sitting next to a foreign, let's just be for real, despot. Oh, we're talking about the president of El Salvador, who has jailed 62,000 people in his own country, who has built a mega prison, which has been described by Amnesty International as a slave camp. And we're forcing American people who have the legal right to be in America without the due process of law. And we allow them to simply be picked up off of the street and sent to a slave camp overseas, and we abdicate the duties to enforce the Supreme Court edicts. Then what exactly does the president have to follow? What rules are in place that can stop him? We have to take this as a grave moment in our Constitution. It's not simply part of the news cycle. This is the question between, do we have a democracy or not? And right now it's leaning towards not.
Now, Virginia, the president of El Salvador is a sovereign nation. He said he was not sending him back. And you cannot facilitate a return if the country that received what is perceived to be somebody who's legal or whatever, if they say, no, it's not happening.
That's right. You can have the plane ready, fueled on the tarmac, but if El Salvador is not interested in releasing that individual from the prison where he's being held, well, it doesn't really matter. So yeah, let's be really clear on the facts of this case. The Supreme Court said the U.S. must facilitate this transfer, and Attorney General Pam Bondi in the Oval Office today was clear about that. They understand their role. They're willing to facilitate that transfer, but that requires the government, the president of El Salvador, to release this individual from prison. And from that interaction we saw today, the president of El Salvador has no interest in releasing this individual. There's, of course, he has been linked in court filings to MS-13. This is potentially a dangerous individual who very clearly entered the U.S. illegally. And Trump has been incredibly clear. Anyone who enters the U.S. illegally is on the table to be deported.
You know, I found this something interesting that the president said today, Karen. Mm-hmm. He finally blamed Putin for starting the war in Ukraine. And he reminded me of something when John McCain was a prisoner of war, mm-hmm. and the president blamed him for being a prisoner. Now, how am I connecting the two? Let me tell you how. Because when he blamed Putin for the invading, he also said Zelensky did not man up and have his artillery and his weapons in place to stop him. And that's where he laid the blame at Zelensky. So if I'm in my home, just listen, Karen, I'm just playing the devil's advocate here. Because Trump can say some things, okay? I don't mean no harm. No, he can say some things.
He can.
Now, I want everybody to hear me. If I'm in my home and I don't have my guns, and somebody break in my home and they kill my family, am I to blame? I'm just curious. I'm just trying to follow his logic. Karen.
So first of all, if you break in my home, I'm going to have access to my guns. But let me be clear.
Okay.
I think what we're seeing is frustration. The president wants this to be over. I think we have been having a lot of conversations in the Middle East, waiting for Russia to accept the terms. And what's happening is the president is frustrated, and he's sharing with his eloquent way that he speaks to foreign leaders that this needs to get wrapped up and that a deal needs to happen. And so how he was splitting the hairs of both sides was to get Putin to come to the table and to sign the deal.
You know, Joe, I assume that what was coming out of the White House over a month ago, that we were close to ending this conflict in Ukraine and Russia. But I mean, Russia's bombing Ukraine like they never bombed them before. I mean, I don't know if you saw the video of the bodies and the destruction. Are we bringing this war to a close? Or is this war expanding?
No, well, unfortunately, Armstrong, far too many people, including some on the right, are actually blaming this war between Ukraine and Russia. They're blaming it either on Ukraine or on the United States. I heard the other day Tucker Carlson speaking at the Heritage Foundation claiming that this is, quote, a war against Russia, end quote. Well, that's preposterous. It's untrue. The villain here is Putin. And I've been proud of our nation for many years now, supporting Ukraine in their efforts to fight for freedom. This was an issue that united most Republicans and Democrats. And I think it's unfortunate to see the way that this current administration has been treating our ally. If you look at the treatment of President Zelensky in the Oval Office, where he was humiliated by President Trump and Vice President Vance, that's unacceptable. This is our ally. And Ukraine's not asking for our troops to be on the ground. They're asking for our continued assistance. And let's be clear on this. Putin is the villain. He is the aggressor. And our friendship here lies with the Ukrainians fighting for their very freedom.
You know, Robert, what is Netanyahu's and Trump's next move in the Middle East?
They've made clear what their next move is. President Trump posted a video, an AI video, what his next move is, of the complete and total genocide of the Palestinian people. They have a plan, and they've articulated the plan, which will be the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip, deporting the remaining individuals out of the area, President Trump said, to other Middle Eastern countries, creating a permanent refugee class. Thereafter, they will, according to President Trump, take over Gaza and rebuild it. The estimates right now to bring the Gaza Strip back to pre-war standards of living is about $350 billion. That is what President Trump has committed the United States taxpayers to pay, just to bring the Gaza Strip back up to the open-air concentration camp that it was prior to the war. So to get it to be the beachfront resort property that him and Netanyahu see it to be will be trillions of American taxpayer dollars in order to create a region that will be eternally an area of terrorist attacks going forward. What we've seen is absolutely no care for the human rights of the Palestinian people there, blaming them for simply being in a location that they want to clear out, with the continuous bombing of the last operational hospital in the north of Gaza. They're making it clear that they do not care about a ceasefire. They have absolutely no plans for peace.
Does Hamas care about the ceasefire? Is it just Israel? Are they the only ones at fault here?
Well, no. Go kill Hamas. But blowing up a hospital is not the same thing as killing Hamas.
Well, Hamas is killing Jews and Israelis too. They're doing the same.
Then go kill Hamas. Those are the combatants. But what we're seeing right now are children being slaughtered. The estimate right now is that nearly 50,000 children in Gaza have died since the beginning of this war. There's a death toll, which is literally incalculable, of the numbers of civilians killed. You cannot simply writ large say that because we're going after Hamas, we can ethnically cleanse an entire region of the world. America loses all of our credibility on the international stage. How exactly can we criticize the Chinese, what they're doing to the Uyghurs and the Xinjiang province, if this is how we treat the Palestinians? Well, how can we talk about how the Russians are treating the ethnic Slavs, if this is how we are treating
well, Robert,
the Palestinians?
I guess this is what happens when you decide on October 7th, 2023, that you're going to go and kill and rape and hold hostage women and children and incite this kind of violence. There's a price that you have to pay. And unfortunate, innocent people die, and we'll be back. So unfortunate, by the way. Miss Allen, I pride myself on trying to be a man of passion and compassion. And even when we witnessed the devastation of the fires in California, and we assumed that nature was the culprit, and then we learned it was an arsonist that burned homes, destroyed families, destroyed schools. It's just almost insane to think that something can happen in America. And then over the weekend, the governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Shapiro, 2 a.m. in the morning, sleeping with his family in the governor's mansion. And his protection, if that's what you call it, bangs on his door to tell him the mansion is on fire because some lunatic scaled the fence, got inside in a minute, security running around the grounds, cannot find him, 2 a.m. in the morning, and they don't find him until 5 p.m. the next day. And yet they're talking about slapping him on the wrist, a $3,000 fine, 3 months in jail. This is premeditated homicide. Are you kidding me?
It's absolutely premeditated. And I think what we're seeing already, lawyers are already exclaiming, well, he can't speak to the press because he's crazy, he's mentally insane. You have to make an example of this individual because this is completely unacceptable. And in an age where we see these kind of attacks happening in increasing frequency, tragically, there has to be a really, really clear line in the sand. It's especially disturbing that this happened just after Governor Shapiro had celebrated Passover in his home. So there's questions there. Were there anti-Semitic motivations? And I think there's also major questions like you raised with the security. What were those security guards doing? Are there additional cameras, sensors that need to be implemented at governor mansions across the United States? I mean, to see this devastation, it almost brings back images of Benghazi. I mean, just horrific that this individual had this kind of access to the governor, to his family, and that he wasn't stopped. there are some major questions that need to be answered and need to be answered quickly. But really, in the immediate, the number one thing that needs to happen today is increased security for every single governor across the United States, whether Republican or Democrat.
And if found guilty, should be executed. The death penalty. Okay? The death penalty. Seriously. This has to stop. Now, let me go back to my man, Joe. We covered a lot of topics here today. We got a lot to talk about. Joe, how are those tariffs going that the president says tariffs are a beautiful thing? Are they as beautiful for the American people in the world as the president say they are, Joe?
No, Armstrong, they're not. Tariffs are taxes, and we have seen so much market havoc over the last few months now because of the president's threats. Of course, we saw the big stock market declines. The markets are still down more than 10% on the year. But more importantly than the stock market turmoil, it's the fact that if these tariffs are levied, we know that it's going to drive up prices for families and for businesses. And even if the president succeeds in eliminating this trade deficit, that is going to have big repercussions for families and businesses. And that's because the trade deficit that he and his advisors in the White House are targeting, the trade deficit, our surplus of imports over exports, that's actually been a big boon to our economy over the past 40 years. Because of that, we have seen hundreds of billions of dollars of investments flow into this country. We've seen wages increase. We see jobs at all-time highs. And putting these tariffs in place threatens all of that. And second of all, this is a true constitutional crisis because the president does not have the power under our Constitution to impose these tariffs. Congress unconstitutionally gave the president these types of powers, and the president is violating not just the Constitution, but is violating those very laws and imposing these tariffs. It's time for Congress to take this power back before this uncertainty continues.
I mean, that's a good point, Karen. Is Congress fulfilling its constitutional duty, or is it just becoming some ornament on Capitol Hill? I mean, I remember Articles 1 and 2 and 3 of the Constitution, and those articles favored the Congress. They can raise tariffs, they can raise taxes, they can declare war. It seems as though that Congress has totally conceded its duties to the President of the United States.
So first of all, my 401k is feeling the tariffs, and I'm asking the same question that you are, which is, what is our United States Congress doing? I saw Ray Dalio yesterday, the founder of Bridgewater, talk about not only a recession, but potentially something worse from this tariff situation. And I agree with the president. Other countries have taken advantage of us for a very long time. However, there is a way to roll this out that doesn't damage the American people, our economy, and cause us to be in this place where other countries are selling our treasuries. The bond market is reacting. This is a problem. This is a huge concern, and every person should be asking their member of Congress, what are you doing to guarantee the economic power of the United States?
You know, Robert, what are the main components of President Trump's proposed big, beautiful bill, and what areas of policy does it aim to address? And how does this bill propose to extend tax cuts, and what are the projected fiscal implications of these extensions?
Absolutely. And Armstrong, I want people to check out what's called the Mar-a-Lago Accords. We've had three big restructuring of the global economy in the last 100 years. After World War II, there was a meeting at the Bretton Woods Resort in Connecticut where they created the Bretton Woods Protocols, which established America as the hegemonic economic power of the entire globe. 1985, at the Crowne Plaza Hotel, Ronald Reagan convened the world leaders for the Plaza Accords, and that very much ushered in this age of globalization that we are currently living in, and which created 40 years of peace and prosperity for the United States of America as we increased our role on the global stage as being essentially the world reserve currency and the world reserve military. What President Trump is attempting to do right now with his quote-unquote Mar-a-Lago Accords is restructure the world economy in such a way that America becomes essentially a vice lord for the entirety of the global economy. He wants other nations to restructure the debt that America has, very much in a process similar to bankruptcy, to pay down the national debt, essentially saying we're not going to pay you, but unless you get rid of portions of our debt or restructure the debt that we have, we will not provide you military protection, we will not provide you any of the economic benefits of being part of the American market. The way that this works with regards to this extension of the Trump tax cuts is Donald Trump and his administration are trying to find a way to balance the U.S. government without implementing the second half of austerity. You cut programs, you cut federal employees, but you don't raise taxes on the millionaires and billionaires in order to pay down the debt. He is so beholden to the billionaire class, to people who were standing there during inauguration, the Elon Musk, the Mark Zuckerbergs, those people that were who were standing there during inauguration. He is so beholden to them. He would rather upend and overturn the entire world economic system just to ensure that we are providing tax cuts and the trillions of dollars to those individuals. And I remind people that during Trump's first 4 years in office, he spent $8 trillion of unfunded and unpaid money, and now we're talking about getting rid of foreign aid for malaria. We're getting rid of federal employees to pay down the deficit and the debt that he helped create, but he is not willing to touch a penny of tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. We are in, as has been stated, a constitutional crisis, and for the conservatives who believe in this, ask yourselves, should one man have the power with one stroke of his pen to send the market 3,000 points one way and then 3,000 points the other way, or should we be in an economy where those decisions are made by the people, by the representatives closer to the people as laid out in the Constitution?
Virginia, do you have any challenges to what you just heard?
Well, I think we have to keep one factor in mind here at the forefront when we're talking about this situation, China. We have to keep China at the forefront of our mind, because that is what is at the forefront of President Donald Trump's mind. He is thinking about, how do I, in the next 4 years, weaken China so that it is no longer an intrinsic threat to the United States and to U.S. global economic power. So tariffs, I think Trump is playing somewhat of a chess game here. Part of me almost wonders of when he imposed those tariffs, and then about 24 hours later said, okay, we're calling off and we're putting that 90-day pause on all tariffs except for China.
Wait a minute. I gotta tell you, let me stop you a minute. I think that was a rumor. I don't think Trump ever said there would be a 90-day pause, and that is why the market went up when they thought that was the truth.
He posted it on True Social. He said there's a 90-day pause on all tariffs except for China, and China we're raising to 125%.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Now he did come back and say he added then at the beginning of this week wanting to impose additional taxes on electronics. So we're kind of waiting to get more news on that front. So Trump, he's clear. He likes tariffs. He's trying to use tariffs. It's an economic play. But I think first and foremost, he wants to use tariffs specifically against China. And he feels that he has a very, very narrow
But he wants to exempt.
This.
He wants to exempt smartphones, but not health care.
Well, I think.
No, Robert. I got to get to somebody else before I come at you.
Or close.
Joel.
Well,
Joel, what were you about to say, Joel?
Well, I'm sorry. I think it's wishful thinking on the part, so including my friend Virginia, it's wishful thinking to think that Trump's play here is just to box in China. If you look at President Trump's rhetoric going back to the mid-1980s, in his newspaper articles and his media appearances, even in The Art of the Deal, it is very clear that President Trump is operating from a different economic foundation than free market supporters have operated from for 40 years. He truly believes that free trade has ripped off the American people, and he refuses to adjust that view, even though people have tried to grab his attention and explain to him that the middle class is better off, that we're exporting more than ever before, that we're still a manufacturing powerhouse. Manufacturing's near an all-time high. And if you look at the president's most recent rhetoric in all of his executive orders in imposing these tariffs, it is far from just focusing on China. It's very clear that he believes that the trade deficit is a problem. And until the president recognizes that a trade deficit is nothing but a capital surplus, a surplus that results in trillions of dollars of investments flowing here, until he recognizes the error of his ways, we can anticipate that he'll continue to threaten and to impose tariffs throughout the remainder of his term. And American families are going to be harmed by this.
Wow. Your voice, your future. We'll be back.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. The wealthiest college, Ivy League at that, in America, Harvard University, said today, Karen, that it will resist Trump's demands to change its governance structure over campus anti-Semitism, concerns saying the government is overstepping its authority. Now, the response, Karen, is likely to set up a fight between Harvard and the federal government, which has threatened to withhold nearly $9 billion in grants and contracts to the school and its affiliated hospitals. And on top of that, the president of Princeton said today he himself feels they don't do enough to combat anti-Semitism at his schools and these Ivy League schools. And they're trying to find a way to work with the administration. What is Harvard doing?
So Harvard is sitting on an endowment, probably the largest endowment of any college in the United States. And I'm positive that that board met to decide this decision. And so probably came to the opinion that they wanted to fight. And this could be a negotiation, this could be a strategy, but they've decided to fight back. And this is going to be interesting to watch to see how this happens. And so, Bill Ackman, some other famous alumni, I'm sure, are going to have thoughts and feelings on this. But Harvard is also an international college full of students from around the globe who are sitting back saying, we've donated money, we have put money into this institution, and we want you to fight back. So I'm looking forward to seeing this play out. We'll see what happens. We've watched what's also happening with Columbia and the threatening of taking away grants. But the one school that has the money to navigate this type of attack around the grants is Harvard University.
Because they get a lot of foreign aid from a lot of wealthy people.
From around the globe.
From around the globe. So let me come to this. Joel, obviously there's so much focus today on Trump, the Republican Congress, the fact that the El Salvadorian president said nada, he's not coming back. But, no focus on the Democrats. AOC and Bernie Sanders are running around on their beautiful tour and joining crowds. But where is the Democratic Party? Has anyone emerged, Joel, that you've noticed? What are the Democrats doing to combat and challenge the era of Trump? Are they still lost in the wilderness?
Well, look, I remember a few weeks ago we saw AOC and avowed socialist Bernie Sanders packing out a stadium out west. So there are some rising voices to the Democrat Party. The problem, I think, as an American, is that most of those leading voices are peddling politics and economics that are far from out of the mainstream of either party, and yet they represent some of the newest party leaders. I think it's unfortunate that some reasonable voices, such as Governor Jared Polis, the Democrat in Colorado, who is quite centrist on much of his economic policies, those voices are increasingly silenced. I mean, look what happened in the last Senate. We had two somewhat, I would say, very reasonable Democrats that were pushed out of the Senate, Senator Sinema from Arizona and Senator Manchin from West Virginia. Increasingly on the left, within the Democrat Party, if you don't toe the party line of the radical left, particularly in economics, you're no longer welcome in that party. And it's very clear that the leadership opportunities are limited, if not non-existent.
Well, what about what the House Minority Leader had to say about himself and Trump's cabinet officials? You know the harsh language that he used? I mean, Virginia, is this an indication that all they could do now is resort to extremely violent rhetoric? They really have no plan. They still have not learned how to combat and deal with Trump and put forward real policy that Americans can embrace?
I don't think they have yet. That doesn't mean that they won't. The Democrat Party, I think, is in a season of reshuffling. They're figuring out who they are. Republicans went through this, I think, over really the past 8 years. And really, I think just in the past maybe half a year, the Republican Party has really solidified into being a party that really does stand behind Trump and his policies, with RFK coming in and all these kind of different ideas and folks. So we've seen this reshifting happen with the Republican Party. Well, now it's time for the Democrat Party to have the same thing. And it is all those things that were raised with these radical far left policies. It's a little bit strange to me that it seems like Democrats are doubling down and they're allowing and kind of pushing out and supporting individuals like Bernie Sanders and AOC to almost carry the banner for the Democrat Party, when we know that the issues that those individuals are pushing, the most Americans aren't comfortable with. Whether it's girls becoming boys, or men and women's sports, or abortion through all 9 months, really radical economic policies. You name it, the average American, they are much more comfortable with centrist positions. And yet the Democrats just don't seem to be getting this message. So if they can't come together and unify and pull back from these radical fringes in the next 4 years, I think it's going to be very, very clear who's going to be in the White House, that it will be a Republican. And it's really up to the leaders specifically of the Democrat Party to focus in on messaging and to understand what the American people are saying. I mean, you take an issue like men competing in women's sports. In the state of California, according to the Napolitan Institute, a survey that they did, over 70% of voters in California, I believe it was 73%, say that they don't want men in women's sports. I mean, in California, these are issues that are not controversial among the average American, and yet for some reason Democrats are convinced that they can win if they just double down on these radical policies. And if they keep doubling down, they're going to keep slipping from polls time and time again. And they're really, in many ways, handing conservatives a victory.
Robert, it's real dicey for the president in testing the patience of his base, how long they can hold out and are willing to sacrifice before what he says about the tariffs, what he says about the economy, what he says of returning Americans back to the golden age. I just don't understand. I don't know how thin the patience of everyday Americans are. I do think a lot of people are uneasy, and I do think there are opportunities here that Democrats can certainly take advantage of with the right messenger. But does it also concern you that national polls by Democrats and others see AOC as the heir to the Democratic Party and the candidate they would like to see run as president in the next cycle?
Not at all. I think we're seeing great leadership coming out of the House of Representatives, representing that new generation of leadership going forward. Because sometimes I think that we, on the different political sides of the aisle, live in different universes. Because I heard people kept saying the Democratic Party policies were economically radical. No one is talking about putting 150% tariff on Chinese goods as the Democratic Party. No one's talking about overturning the Bretton Woods protocols and overturning the Plaza protocols in order to usher in a new economic system where international oligarchs control the world market. When we're talking about radical social policy, no one is sitting now the dictator of El Salvador saying that we can kidnap people against the will of the Supreme Court and put them in prison camps overseas on the left. So when we say that there are radical policies on the other side, this is what we talked about in this show today. And this idea that we're going to talk about the 10 reported cases in human history of transgender athletes playing in women's sports, and say that makes up for the millions of people whose 401ks have been destroyed in the last week. But we're talking about our allies turning against us. We're talking about trade deals that took a half century to create being torn up overnight, and you think you're going to anti-transgender your way to victory out of that? This is a level of insanity on the right, which Ronald Reagan would come back from his grave as a zombie and hopefully talk some sense to these people because they have abdicated their role as constitutional conservatives. What happened to the Christian coalition? What happened to the small government conservatives? What happened to saying that the power should lie with the people and not with one man, the president? They have simply said we will roll over and lay down on every constitutional issue because we have these social fears of gay people, apparently.
You know, there's a new reality on college campuses, Karen, and it's fear and silence. My, what a difference a year make. Now, they may say whatever they want to say and protest about Trump's policy and deportation and ICE just swooping you up and getting you out of here, but they are fearful.
They are.
Is this good for freedom of speech and freedom of protest?
No, it's not good for freedom of speech. No matter what the speech is, it should be allowed to be shared. But however, and I wanted to bring this up in a previous segment, younger people are communicating in other ways. You know, they're on Telegram, they're on TikTok, they're having conversations with each other in person. So what I'm afraid of is that what used to be in public with a microphone and a rally now goes online and goes into these echo chambers where we're not monitoring it at the level. And as members of a different generation, I'm a Gen Xer, we're not seeing it because they're going to start talking to each other in channels and methods and streaming and other avenues to have these conversations. And so I would prefer that they have these conversations in public so that we're all able to comment, see, debate, discuss, and have this conversation as opposed to taking it offline.
You know, you mentioned TikTok. Did you see what China was doing with TikTok over the weekend? Did anybody see that?
I saw it all weekend. And I want people to understand, especially the people at home, TikTok in China is completely different than the TikTok in the United States. And a guest earlier talked about this chess game that we're playing with China. Well, China moved the rook out into the field because they used TikTok over the weekend to flood American TikTok with goods and services that are provided in China, and to teach the American people that these products that we buy in the United States, where we pay $15, $20, $50, $100 for, cost $10, $20, $30, $50, or $1 in China. And that was a shock that went through all the social media platforms to say all these products that you buy, Americans, that come from China. And there was one really distinguished TikToker who talked about in his home there were no American products, and asked the American citizen, how many products in your home are made in China?
And we'll be back because we must discuss Blue Origin. They're now astronauts.
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
I gotta tell you, when I saw Gayle King walking up to that capsule, she looked so scared. And I know she was calling on Jesus now. And I noticed when she returned, she hit that dirt, she called on Jesus. Now, they'll call on Jesus when they feel they need him now, they'll put him on the ship. But let me tell you, she was petrified. But anyhow, Katy Perry and Gayle King, and all women, they didn't need any men. They wanted to be this all females, Robert. That's what they wanted. And Joel, girl power. That's what they wanted today. They got that girl power. And now, the world, the media and their manipulation is calling them astronauts. Now, they only trained over the weekend. I'm not taking anything away from girl power. I was so proud of them. I watched every minute of it. But I want to ask, let me start with the men on the panel, if I may. I don't know. I already know what Robert's going to say, so I was going to start with Robert because I know he's not going to be politically correct. So let me answer for Robert. So Robert, help us understand the significance of Blue Origin's NS-31 mission being the first all-female crewed space flight since 1963. And do you not believe they're astronauts?
Well, it's not about believing or disagreeing. There's an international line called the Kármán line, which is 62 miles above the Earth's surface. Once you pass that, you are officially in space and can call yourself an astronaut. The level that they went to was far below the Kármán line. It was just above pre-orbital space. You can see the curvature of the Earth. You get a couple minutes of weightlessness, and then you descend back down to Earth. So no, you're not an astronaut. No, you do not go into space. It is a glorified roller coaster ride for very rich people. But the reason that this was significant was about 2 years ago, Blue Origin had a launch accident in an uncrewed mission where the capsule had to use its emergency ejection system and then come down to Earth. After that, all of the people who had scheduled rides to be on Blue Origin decided not to go on Blue Origin. So how do you drum business back up? You create a publicity stunt like this to get Armstrong Williams to talk about this, and you use a little bit of rage bait. You use a little bit of rage bait to make sure you gild the lily on it. So good job to the marketing team at Blue Origin. They really need to be focusing on getting their orbital class rocket, the New Glenn, into space, and also on mass production of the BE-4 engine, which is supposed to be sold to Rocket Lab and other companies that have been delayed for nearly a half decade now. But it is a great marketing idea.
But you have to admit, Joel, Elon Musk has made this safer and much more possible than ever before.
Look, when it comes to Blue Origin, this is a great marketing ploy, and to the extent that those who are wealthy can afford to take this space tourism trip, I think it's wonderful. I'm not sure this is going to have the effect of necessarily spurring an interest in science, particularly among females, because this wasn't necessarily a trip that was selecting the most scientifically qualified people to embark on this mission. To the extent that we're actually concerned about the next generation, both men and women, in the United States specifically, pursuing science, this is going to have limited success. We need to really fixate on the nuts and bolts in our public education system, which increasingly is turning out young adults that are quasi-literate or semi-literate. It's time to get back to the basics. I think it's a lot of fun talking about this and following this, but this is going to have no real lasting impact on the ability of our education system to churn out those who are better equipped to tackle the leading scientific questions of the next 100 years.
Well, listen, NASA's rocket scientist, Aisha Bowe, is serious. She's just in a class by herself compared to everybody else that was up there. So let me just give Aisha some credit. She's got serious creds, Karen.
She does, and she's incredible. first of all, I'm a marketer. I watched it today. I teared up a little bit. And I do think about the young girls and boys who saw it in school today or at home tonight with their parents and have a different mindset about what is possible. And I agree, we have a lot of challenges in our education system. I don't debate that at all. But for a 10-year-old girl or boy who's going to go look up Aisha Bowe and look up some of these women and try to understand who they are and what they've done. And so kudos to Lauren Sanchez, because this was her idea. And she asked Jeff to do it. He said yes.
And she's a pilot.
And she is a helicopter pilot herself and a journalist. So kudos to her for having this idea. I love the girl power. I love seeing them do this. I mean, yes, the marketing, the beautiful shots, you know, the magazine style look of the clothes. But, you know, for the little boy and girl watching, I'm hopeful that this will spark something and lead to more people who want to go into these fields.
And I will say this, Virginia, there may all have been minorities, but they're only the minorities in this sense, is that they were all wealthy and could afford to pay. Now, I don't know if they paid that $250,000 each. I don't know. But Robert is right about one thing. It is a very elitist flight, okay?
Sure.
No question about that.
Is.
It is.
Oh, no question. But I don't really have a problem with that, because that's money that hopefully is, you know, being kind of funneled back into space programs and NASA that will ultimately raise the bar and allow us to do more research on space and allow us to recruit better real astronauts who can take real fact-finding missions into space. So I think it served its purpose. Everyone has called it a marketing ploy, and that is exactly what it was. It was a successful marketing campaign to get more Americans aware of space travel. And I'm guessing that there are a lot of individuals with very deep pockets who are now starting to think about, well, that sounds like a fun way to spend a Saturday. I'd love to take a little trip to space. So this, I think, is a very good thing for the world of space and developing new rockets and developing greater technology that can help us explore the vastness of space.
Joe, why is President Trump and his administration trying to cut the State Department funding in half?
That's an excellent question, one that Senator Marco Rubio would probably be best equipped to answer. I think there is there's an undercurrent within some of this of the current administration that fails to recognize the importance of our soft power as our country. As especially since World War II, we have been able to leverage our relationships, particularly through international aid, to build out alliances across the country, to actually spur a number of countries towards governments that are both more democratic and also more free markets. A big part of the reason why we have seen several billion people lifted out of poverty over since the end of World War II has been because of our soft power in addition to our military deterrence. And one of my concerns over all the commotion over the cuts to USAID, and a lot of those cuts I think are warranted, I am afraid that we're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, because we're ignoring, the public is not being, the administration is not making the public alert to the many positive programs funded actually through USAID that have made a difference in this world. I think this goes back to what we discussed earlier, the importance of Congress. Congress, as the appropriator, should be more involved in directing how these resources are funneled out. One of the big problems with a lot of this foreign aid over the past few decades has been that left-wing entities and individuals within the State Department have directed taxpayer dollars to pushing forward left-wing agendas in countries across the world. Congress should become more involved and work with the administration to ensure that we can continue to actually finance this aid, but to do it in a way that is not ideologically left-wing.
You know, Robert, Netanyahu's son slammed President Macron of France for calling for a Palestinian state, while Netanyahu said his son was totally out of line. They feel it's nonsensical that at this point that Macron is asking for a Palestinian state. What is the thinking behind all this?
We've talked about this earlier. Look, the idea of the two-state solution is something that the West has been working towards for the better part of 40 years. Understanding that Israel has a right to exist, but also respecting the rights of Palestinians to have a right of return to their homeland as existed previous to 1947. We have been trying to negotiate agreements on this between all of the Western powers and between the Palestinians and Israel, whether that be under the leadership of Yasser Arafat, the leadership of Hamas, or any other entities that are there and able to negotiate. But what we're seeing now is Israel coming to the opinion of they don't want the lines of 1960. They don't want the lines of 1947. They want the lines of 2000 BC. They want the historical kingdoms of Israel and Judah. They do not believe that the Palestinian people have a right to exist within their own homeland. And what they are doing, but through this stance, through this last kick of Netanyahu, is condemning the Middle East to continuous war for the next century, as these same Palestinian factions who have been fighting for the right to return to their homeland for the last 75 years continue that battle going forward. And we will not have peace until there is a two-state solution, and the Israeli government is making it clear that that is no longer their agenda, and that spells trouble for the entirety of that region.
Karen, your final thoughts? Something we may not have discussed today?
No, I just wanted to agree that on the Gaza-Palestinian issue is that there has to be a two-state solution. And I'm all for girl power. I'm all for girl power.
Virginia? Girl power.
I just want to remind listeners that there is a 21-year-old American-Israeli, Idan Alexander, that is still hostage in Gaza. This week, it's Holy Week. Pray for him, pray for his freedom, his release, pray for his parents who are from New Jersey. And a video of Hamas released a propaganda hostage video of Idan over the weekend. And you have to believe that for Mr. and Mrs. Alexander, just incredibly painful that their son now for over 550 days has been held hostage. So keep the Alexander family in prayer this week.
You know, this world is so upside down. This 17-year-old in Wisconsin who killed his parents because he wanted to embrace Nazism and needed $10,000 to assassinate Trump and overthrow the government. And then you have this other situation in Mexico City where this person was arrested for these incendiary devices. I mean, these young people, what is going on in our country? There's so much that we need to pray for and pray about. But I'm telling you, the breakdown of the family, when family members cannot see the signs of these kids that they're troubled and cannot get them mental health. And a lot of these mental institutions have been shut down. I mean, let me tell you, there's a spiritual illness that's going on in this world. I don't know if it's going to get any better, but is it? It is Passover week. Thank you all so much for joining us. Karen, Robert, Virginia, Joel, WJLA 24/7. Good night, everybody.